I know that white folks like the Reginald Lewis Museum better than they like the Great Blacks and Whites Museum. Do you know why? Because the Reggie Lewis Museum makes white folks feel more comfortable. You see, this is the history here. This is what we went through here. When you go down, in my book I wrote about Mary Turner lynching that took place in Valdosta, Georgia, in this century, or last century. And I think that what we've got to do is teach our children. I have problems with people who don't know anything about our history try to teach it, and they pervert it. And you know, and that's the problem I have. So we're on the same page.
Well, let's get back to the Emancipation Proclamation. Who did it free and how many people did it free? I'm saying, was it just a document declaring that the Confederate States slavery would be free? Places like Alabama, Mississippi, that weren't controlled by the Union, and the Union was far away. Who did it free?
It freed a number of people. It freed people who were strong enough and brave enough to be what some people are now calling self-emancipators. When the Union Army moved into an area, a part of what the Emancipation Proclamation says is that if people were to go and fall into the lines with the Union Army, that their freedom would be protected. And those people could actually leave the area, settle someplace else, maybe, you know, leave the South or where slavery was still being practiced, and start a life for themselves. And so I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I do know that men, women, and children did fall into Union lines. I also know, as Dr. Martin said, that there was quite a bit of violence and brutality that went along with that. I know that people of African descent worked for the Union Army many times without pay, as cooks, as engineers, as laborers, and they claimed and held on to their freedom that way.
So when we ask the question, who freed the slaves? The document didn't free the slaves. They, in essence, they didn't free themselves.
I think the first answer would be that many enslaved people freed themselves.
Okay.
And what does that mean? They just got up and walked?
It meant that they walked, ran, sailed to freedom. And I think that a part of the problem with telling this story is that so oftentimes in the history of African Americans, we think that people did things for us. When we were enslaved, they fed us, they housed us, they gave us clothing. When the reality was, we were the ones who were growing the crops. We were the ones who were providing for the people who held us in bondage. And so it isn't a simple answer, but African Americans did a whole lot more than what we have been credited as doing in the history books.
And so then are you making the point that when African Americans are seeking something in return, it's not welfare, it's actually overdue payment?
Well, that's
reparations,
which is you know, a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, you should bring it back for that. I was, you know, fortunate. One of my teachers when I was doing my PhD was John O. Franklin. And Dr. Franklin wrote a book called Runaway Slaves. You ought to read it. And Dr. Franklin used to tell us, at any given moment on plantations, we have this image of plantations like everybody just picking cotton and singing Dixie and, you know, fanning the master and, you know, all of that stuff like that. They said, Dr. Franklin said, at any given moment, 30% of all enslaved Africans were away from the plantation. They were in runaway mode. And he cites some of this stuff. The most common time for Africans to run Let me ask you, when was during the year, when was the most
Saturday night. No.
But what day of the year? Think about it. If you were an enslaved African, what day would you try to run away? I would try to run away Christmas Eve. You know why I would run away Christmas Eve? Because they would say, they look at Donnie and say, you know, Donnie that ran away and it's night before Christmas. And they said, well, let's just catch Donnie after Christmas. We got to open up the present. Then the day after Christmas, they said, well, let's just wait till New Year's, you know. So Donnie get a 1 week head start. That was the #1 time that Africans, see, that was smart. That made it seem like we were, Dr. Franklin used to tell us how that, and I didn't know this either, that he said that, and this comes directly from Africa, they would grind up the whiskers of horses, dogs, and cats on the plantation. Just grind them up until it dust. And when I was in Africa, they do that over in Africa right now in some parts. And then they would sprinkle it into the master's food. Do you know what that does to your stomach? After about 3 days, your stomach starts bleeding. And they didn't have all these machines they got nowadays, and the person would die. So this image that the house slave and the, you know, feel that they were separate, the house people were oftentimes the most rebellious people on the plantation. That's probably the only thing I disagree with Malcolm X about. But, you know, so the idea that the plantation was a calm place and people was drinking lemonade and slaves, that's a false image. And when I saw Django, this is another critic, those are the best dressed slaves I've ever seen in my life. They didn't dress us like that. Don't believe that stuff.
And in